to ELT in Chile, podcast about teaching English in Chile. In this space, Kevin and I talk to teacher trainers, and academics who like to share their experiences and expertise in various aspects of English language teaching in Chile and also in other countries. So in this video episode, we'll discuss a topic that has truly transformed our field, generative AI or generative artificial intelligence in language teaching. So we're absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. Benjamin Luke Moorhouse. Kevin.
Right. Thank you very much. Professor Benjamin Luke Moorhouse is an associate professor in the Department of English at the City University of Hong Kong in China. His research focuses on language teacher education, classroom interaction, and more recently, the integration of generative AI in language teaching and learning. He has published extensively in leading journals such as ELT Journal, Roke Journals, and Computers in Education, and is one of the most visible scholars globally working at the intersection of AI and language education. He's also the author of the Cambridge Elements book, Generative Artificial Intelligence and Language Teaching, where he provides a research-informed exploration of how Gen AI is reshaping our profession, including both opportunities and challenges. Benjamin, welcome to this podcast. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I think I was discussing with Benjamin how I came across his work, and I think maybe, as Kevin was saying, one of the first books I saw was the Cambridge Element books, like Generative Artificial Intelligence and Language Teaching, which is, which you try to provide like a conceptual clarity and also practical guidance. Here, the main thing is like, how would you summarize this book, maybe? Because there is also like generative AI is like a buzzword, like it's everywhere, it's like,
yeah.
How would you maybe explain that, maybe that book, or how do you think it can help other teachers, especially like language teachers?
A great question. Thank you for it. I mean, I think the purpose of the book was to kind of like provide, one was to kind of like give a kind of a practical guide to teachers and thinking about how they might understand the use of AI. But the other, I think, is to say also to show the kind of complexity of this topic in a kind of user-friendly, accessible way. Because teachers are getting a lot of marketing and well, I want to say propaganda, but about the utility of these tools,
Yeah.
from people with a vested interest in the kind of utility of these. And
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to give the kind of teacher academic thinking on this, and get the teachers to think, okay, when is this a tool that can support my students to learn language? And when I do that, what are my students losing? Or even what am I losing as a teacher? And what do I need in terms of knowledge skills to be able to kind of use these ways that do more benefit than harm?
Mhm.
So that's the kind of key purpose of the book. And we wanted to do something short, like an Elements, because they're accessible, right? You
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah.
People can look at it and go, okay, I can actually read this. I don't need to get an AI to summarize it. I
Yeah.
can just
Yes. I can
access the
actually.
text itself.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was kind of the idea. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and also let's say in that particular book, you actually play, with AI a little bit to show, let's say, some examples how you can actually generate, or if it helps, or if it maybe if it really maybe doesn't help. So, but yeah, Kevin, maybe you have your own questions.
Thank you. Yes. Well, this is really interesting. The topic is really interesting, but in academia and language teaching, we come across like buzzwords. We come across short-lived
Yeah.
ideas. We come across so many things that seem new and bright and shiny, and then all of a sudden they are not. So, what do you think in terms of generative AI? Sorry, are we in a temporary adjustment period? Are we experiencing a fundamental transformation in what it means to teach and learn languages? And would you perhaps compare the arrival of generative AI into language education, to the arrival of the internet, or of a different magnitude? That's a multi-layered question. I do apologize.
No. I mean, I think it all depends on the way we look at it. I mean, the interesting thing is we haven't got the pedagogies yet to implement AI in ways that kind of we can say definitively that these are benefiting. We haven't had the kind of the academic research to look at whether these are actually, net positive for student learning. We've got a lot of counter arguments, right? we do see that students kind of offloading tasks to these tools. Students are busy. They've got a lot going on in their lives. There's a lot of distractions in their lives, and they've got a tool that
Hmm.
can simulate their own processes of doing things, and they will it's quite attractive, and we know other people will do it too, and even ourselves. We've got a deadline, and we've got like an option of asking AI to help us meet that deadline, we may well do that, right? So we've got a lot of evidence on that side of the kind of that those kind of uses. But when it comes to the kind of the pedagogical uses or the learning uses, we obviously have less evidence. We can draw on some ideas, right, that might help us. Like
Hmm.
we know that things like personalized learning is good if students have a language that's at their level,
Hmm.
that they are more likely to be able to kind of learn from that. And we know that AI, if it's used well, like I'm talking about the kind of large language models, conversational AIs, we know that if we prompt them effectively, give them enough information about the user, they can kind of produce language
Hmm.
that meets the learner's needs, and they can engage in interactions that meet the needs of the learners. So we know that they can do those things. So we can kind of understand from our kind of current theories that they could do good, right?
Yeah.
They could help learners. But we also know that we need to kind of find a way for teachers to be able to kind of guide that, because we know that students can be self-directed,
Yeah.
but they need to want to learn. They need
Yeah.
to have
Hmm.
the capability to learn, right? And they have to be able to sustain that learning. So, whether students are going to wake up in the morning, log into a chat bot, and then have an interaction in English or in Spanish
Yeah.
or in Portuguese or in Chinese, we don't know yet, right?
Yeah.
And that's probably why we're still kind of like there is still some skepticism
Yeah.
about the potential utility of these tools for learning. But I do think it does have that kind of potential. It's just
Hmm.
how we think about it, and also how do we prepare our students for that, and then also how do we consider the other things? Like what do they lose? How do we facilitate that so they can actually, they can transfer what they're doing with those chatbots to other human beings,
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting point. Sorry, if I can just follow up a little bit.
Yes.
Mm,
You mentioned something really interesting there. The I can't quite recall what you said exactly, the
mm,
words you used, but you said something along the lines, if we use AI perhaps responsibly, if we prompt it correctly, if we prompt it right.
mm,
I think that's a huge challenge, isn't it? I mean, perhaps
mm.
even more so for educators than for the students, although I can imagine for the students as well. And I think this really brings us to a point where we need to think about how can I use AI, generative AI, to support the learner on their journeys rather than to offload tasks that are a bit unpleasant or a bit, difficult. I think that's a really important thought. I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's giving valued tasks, right?
Hmm.
Like if well, I always think about my own self when I do these things, and I always think, well, what task do I get pleasure in doing, and what task don't I get pleasure in doing? And how do I sustain my interest in something? And usually it's seeing value in it, right? So, I
Hmm.
really like writing. I really like writing, and that's why I can kind of engage in writing. But I know many people don't.
Mm.
So for me, like I can sustain my interest in that. It has a lot of value to me as a task. And
Hmm.
then seeing that like finished product that I've kind of dedicated my time to, and then it gets recognition, then that's enough for me
Yeah.
to be happy. To be invited to a podcast in Chile, that's enough for me. I'm happy. uh, but for others, that can be a task that's not value, right? It can be just something they see as busy work or something they need to get done.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And in that way, then it becomes a task of offloading, right? So like,
Hmm.
how fast can I get this task done? How much limited effort can I put into this task, but
Mm.
still get through it? And when it's those kinds of tasks, then they're really susceptible to offloading. And people were doing it before, right?
Yeah.
giving it to other people to do tasks for them that they don't want to do, finding the same task online and just
Yeah.
using it again, or changing a little bit. So I think that's key, and I think in language learning that can be tricky because a lot of students are learning it instrumentally, right? They're
Yeah.
learning it and they're not necessarily seeing the long-term benefit. They're seeing the short term. My teacher's
Yeah.
given me this homework to do. I don't really want to do it. Here's a tool that can do it for me.
Yeah.
Rather than, oh, this homework task actually helps me to learn something that will improve myself. Yeah.
Thanks for your answer. That's really interesting. It all boils down again to motivation again, right? Doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's a wider motivation, right? It's a multi-layered motivation, right?
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
first of all, they have to kind of see the intrinsic value of learning language to their own self, and how it makes them a better person, right?
Yeah.
Or a more knowledgeable person, or they becoming that kind of bilingual or multilingual person is part of who they are.
Yeah.
If they see that as kind of an ultimate goal, then they will go through that kind of, and then they realize that that's actually it's difficult. It's a struggle
Yeah.
to kind of get there. And then at the same time they see all the things the teachers are asking them to do as part of doing that.
Yeah.
Then it kind of all fits in together. But if they think the teacher's tasks are not helping them to do that, like they're just busy work or things like this, then they won't. Or if they haven't got that kind of desire of becoming a bilingual, multilingual, or they don't see it as attainable,
Yeah.
or desirable, then they're going to struggle anyway. And before they wouldn't have used AI because it didn't exist, but they would have also probably failed.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
As language learners, right?
That's
So
a good point.
Yes, absolutely.
So now they're not failing on the day-to-day task, but they're probably still failing as language learners.
Yes. Or also like maybe in some other areas that people are, let's say, going back to just like paper exams or paper evaluations, like to try to maybe avoid that. And in a sense, Benjamin, like, do you think that, well, Kevin and yourself, you have been discussing maybe the issue of sometimes academic integrity, but do you think in a way that can generative AI actually support deeper thinking if it is maybe prompted well, if it is structured well, or if there is like a specific goal, do you think that it can actually help, to do that?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of depends on the level we're working with a little bit, doesn't it? Because I think and again, I guess if we're looking from the teacher perspective, it depends on the pedagogies we're using a little bit as well. So initially, I might have mentioned in the book, I was initially saying, maybe we get students to think first of their ideas and then consult AI with their ideas or something like this. So it sounds pedagogically quite good, right?
Yeah.
But over time, if the AI keeps giving better ideas than themselves, then eventually they'll skip the first step and go straight to the second, right? So it's like, well, and then perhaps they're not deep thinking, then they're just going to AI. So then we may think, well, okay, what you do is you trigger AI, ask it to give you 20 ideas, and then you have to think through which one are best, right?
Yeah.
So it's another pedagogy, right?
Yes.
But then they might go, well, I can ask AI, I've got 20 ideas. Can you give me the best one?
Which one is the best one? Yes.
Yeah. So if they haven't got the kind of knowledge to select carefully which they think is the best, or they haven't got a task to do, like asking discussing with their classmates which one's the best, going through a process of figuring out which one's best, then perhaps they can skip that too. So partly is pedagogy. I think what it can do is it can perhaps make us think outside of our boxes.
Yeah.
We do get siloed into our own way of thinking about the world. And we might say, like, you might be able to, if you prompt well, like, so I've written this book, for example, I've written this article, if I was had a different kind of thinking about the world, how would I have written this? Or what ideas would I have had about this? Or, I've written this, with the Hong Kong teacher in mind. If I was writing this for a Chilean teacher, would I write the same thing? Get its ideas on that. Like, what kind of things might I need to consider in a different context? And in those ways, you might kind of be able to expand out beyond your kind of current kind of knowledge, because it might give you ideas that are beyond where your contextual understanding, your theoretical understanding, your practical understandings. But you still probably want to verify that, right? You probably wouldn't want to write I probably wouldn't write a book as like how to use AI in Chile, for example.
Yeah.
You know, it probably wouldn't be in my best interest to do that, having no knowledge whatsoever. And there's a good chance that I'm going to get some bad reviews. But it might give me some ideas about my framing and how I'm positioning things based on my own experiences,
Yeah,
what I haven't considered. So that's probably where it can help us. But we need to be understanding that that's when we ourselves have to understand that we're always looking at things,
yes,
blinking. And it might help us to do that, just like having conversations with people from different contexts, different environments can do as well.
Absolutely. So Kevin, I think maybe yes.
Yeah, thank you. It was quite interesting what you said about the two different approaches to asking Gen AI for the 10 best ideas and selecting one,
Yes.
and then kind of going back and asking for the best one because you can't make up your mind. That actually triggers another question that I found quite interesting to ask when we talk about teacher and learner agency as two distinct concepts apart from each other. What effect does Gen AI have on teacher and then on learner agency? What I've come across in my day-to-day, what I have been coming across in my day-to-day since Gen AI has been around, are students commenting, teachers admitting, I just use Gen AI to create a task quickly because, I overslept or I just can't, I don't know, I just want to do something different. And I don't know, in my view, this takes away, or this is almost like a surrender of teacher agency, like teachers surrendering their agency, and ultimately learners, be that students, be that language learners, like students as in university students or language learners in whatever context. It's just like, oh, I've written this short story in creative writing, or AI has done it because I couldn't come up with a good idea. So there's clearly somewhere a reduction of teacher agency and learner agency involved in the discussion about Gen AI. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question.
Multi-layered.
Loaded question, though. Loaded question, but
yeah. I mean, I think your case example is a good one, and many tech companies are really happy to hear that teachers are kind of turning their tool to make these resources, right? Because that eventually that just becomes normalized, right? So if they have success or perceived success from those materials, as in students do them or whatever it might be, whether there's learning gain or not might be difficult to judge, but then eventually just becomes kind of part of the teacher's kind of normal routines, that instead of like trying to find resources online or finding authentic text to work with or other things, they just go, well, let's go to AI because it can give me good enough materials for my part, or even better ones than I can find, or more kind of relevant. I know I can give it 10 vocabulary items and it can create a story with those 10 words in it and give me some comprehension questions, which might even achieve my goals, my kind of short-term goals better than perhaps even finding an authentic text or other kind of thing that I have to modify or isn't quite right, or the level's not quite right, or whatever it might be, or even copyright. Do I have the right to use this in my lesson, or other things like this they may have to consider. So I think they can definitely feel that way, and it can give them a sense of agency when they do that too, right? Because they themselves maybe feel that they're actually in control of the materials rather than having to use textbooks or other things as well. So I think that's an interesting one. But then to do that well, that requires kind of like the competency to be able to kind of say these materials are suitable for my learner. What are they actually learning when they do these tasks? And also the kind of like, what do I lose when I continually use AI generated content with my students? Are they only getting similar kinds of language every time? Are they getting a kind of a diversity of genres? Are they getting a diversity of experiences? Are they engaging with authentic text as well? Are they learning other skills like digital literacies, information literacies, which they won't get necessarily from AI text because they're not thinking it as a kind of a ideological artifact. Whereas if you take an article from a news site, perhaps you can do some of the kind of like, what's the author's intention here? Why do they choose this word and not that word? You're not doing that so much with an AI text. So I think it's that kind of, if they've got that pedagogical reasoning and then they're using that, then it increases agency. And if they've got the competency to know that, then they're increasing agency. But if they don't, then it's reducing agency, I think. because
Mm-hmm.
they're just kind of okay. This tool's better than me at making materials. I'm going to offload that part of my work to
True.
AI,
Yeah.
To
and
the
then
yeah.
the AI can do it better than I can, and therefore, whenever I need something that I haven't got, I'm just going to go to the AI.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it all depends on their kind of their competencies,
Mm-hmm.
and how strong they have how strong their pedagogical reasoning is
Mm.
when they're making these decisions. Yeah.
I think that's really important also, like, especially like you talk about digital literacies, Gen AI literacy. I think that's an important yet missing part in most teacher education programs still, isn't it? I
Yeah,
mean,
it
clearly
is.
we're literally just entering this new
Yeah. We are.
era,
I
shall we
think
say,
we are.
where,
Yeah.
where Gen AI is becoming part of our day to day,
Yes.
almost in every aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I think we
yeah.
are in the storm right now. So it's difficult, like sometimes to. I mean, this is something that Benjamin and I maybe we were discussing, let's say briefly. When
Mm-hmm.
you like even like institutions are, let's say, having issues or like maybe policy
Mm.
how to develop policies regarding like the use or
Mm.
maybe or the declared use or the undeclared use of maybe generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that you also mentioned in your Cambridge Element books, like the idea that maybe institutions should try to communicate guidelines. The idea is like to maybe reduce fear, but also maintain academic standards. How
Mm.
like do you think that this is possible? Do you think this is maybe just a utopia, or there is something that no it can be done to for them
Yeah,
to
yeah.
maybe coexist?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I've been trying to do it in my own teaching. I mean,
Mm.
I'm not doing language teaching myself, right?
Yeah,
I kind of work in English department, so I'm kind of
yeah,
doing pre-service teacher training, professional
Mm-hmm.
development, and I do work on English language course like English to global language kind of courses, things like
yeah,
this. So in my courses, I've always tried to embed AI as an artifact for
yeah,
exploration. And I think
Mm-hmm.
once you start to do that, they start to become more conscious of it as ideological and also as commercial, and these kind of things. And I think those are important beginning points. So they understand the positioning of AI in the world, of AI as a tool in the world, and then exploring it from different kind of angles. How good is it at creating different kinds of Englishes, for example? That's what I did last semester. And does it stereotype? When you ask it to create a text, of course, without any kind of like signaling towards a particular English, it will always come to North American
yeah.
white middle class kind of style of writing, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if you ask it to kind of like create a Singaporean English, for example,
Mm.
then it will generally over stereotype the kind of markers of it will make it much more informal. Even if you want a formal text, it will have a lot of these kind of like markers
Yes.
that are kind of distinct of a Singaporean English, but kind of overuse them, and it almost becomes like a parody of Singaporean English rather than Singaporean English itself,
Yeah.
right? These kind of things can really help them to kind of see this a bit and understand this. And then when you're doing that, then you're kind of also then talking through your assignment tasks, like, what are they trying to demonstrate? If you use AI to do them, are you able to demonstrate those things? So you kind of do that level, and then at the same time, you kind of talk through like what AI. So I always have like a focused AI policy where I talk them through what types of uses of AI are suitable for a particular assignment, and I relate them to the course learning outcomes. So I try to do that
Mm-hmm.
as clearly as possible for students. But of course, some students still maybe misinterpret, or they're more concerned about other things. So they still use it in ways that perhaps aren't the ways I want them to. Uh, and that's a challenge. And there's still obviously a wider discourse around how we're supposed to be using these tools. And in our communities, it's like be truthful, right? Be honest,
Yeah.
be accountable through honesty. But in the wider discourse, it's don't be honest.
Yeah.
So in that, and then what they're getting from social media and they're getting from other places is don't be honest. Here's the way to trick your professor. Here's the way to
Yes.
trick your teacher. So they're getting that in the kind of wider kind of discourse around these tools.
Yeah.
And then within our discourse, they're saying, look, we want transparency, we want trustworthiness.
Yeah. Yeah.
These are core fundamental values of the
Of
academic
education.
community
Yes.
and education. And they're getting, how to trick your teacher, how to
opposite,
do an
yes.
assignment 1 minute before the deadline. And they're being fed these
There's
different
a whole
things.
industry around that.
Yeah. Humanizers and stuff like this, right? AI humanizers. They've all been set up, and there was one recently that was called Einstein that got a lot of press, which would go to your Canvas page or Moodle page, go to your kind of learning management system and pretend to be you as a student and do all the tasks for you. It's the company that launched it was saying, students are using AI anyway, so why don't we just create a tool that kind of makes it more efficient, kind of thing. And it's like, well, but all those tasks have been designed for a reason, right? They're supposed to help this learner kind of engage with the content. If they're not, then we need to go back to pedagogical design and curriculum design.
Yes.
Not just circumvent it with a tool, right?
Like creating, I don't know, an avatar of somebody to basically work in this online environment.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's the challenge, is we're kind of working with these things, and at the same time as we're working with this idea that the companies they're fighting for market dominance.
Yeah.
So they're trying to get these tools into absolutely everybody to do absolutely everything as quick as possible without necessarily considering those aspects, right? How are they affecting their fundamental foundational principles and ideas that we hold as important or are needed to make these institutions work. Yeah.
Yes, very much. Okay, let's assume for a moment there is still integrity, and let's assume for a moment that not everyone is using AI to cheat on their essays or their assignments.
Yeah, which I'm sure they aren't.
No, absolutely. Well, you propose the Gen AI C framework, which is like the professional Gen AI competence framework with 5 dimensions of professional competence. If teachers could prioritize, or perhaps should prioritize, only one dimension to begin with, which would that be and why?
Ooh, tricky question.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, they're all interrelated, right? It's hard to do one without the other, but
Yeah.
probably the it's difficult. I think if they know how these tools work, the technical proficiency aspect, then the other things can kind of come from. If they've already got good pedagogical understanding already as a teacher, then there's a good chance they can connect those things together. If they're already kind of working ethically, then they can probably connect that together once they have that knowledge of how these tools work. Once they kind of understand those things about them, I think that's probably key to doing, but it should always be framed within that kind of wider thing. It's not like, look how great this tool is, but it's more about look how why does it create bias? Why does it create hallucinations? Why do the texts have this kind of formulaic structure to them? So kind of understanding how they work at that level, and then they can kind of connect the other things together, and also become more conscious when they're using them around those things. So I give workshops for schools, and I always get them to use teachable machines. Do you know there's the tool teachable machines? So I'll get them to kind of train one on image generated images, and then train them to be inaccurate. Mislabel an image, and then they can see how easy it is to make if the data is labeled incorrectly, how the output is incorrect. And how the machine doesn't have the world knowledge to question it. We would question it. If someone says the sky is yellow, we'd be like, well, hold on a minute, it's blue. But if you try to train an AI and say the sky is yellow, it will say the sky is yellow. It won't challenge you.
Yes.
It will always just be yellow to it. So this kind of thing can be really useful to teach them how they work. And I try to have more demonstrations of that, how they work, creating different kinds of artifacts from the tools to show how they work. And once they have that, then the other things kind of fall into line a bit.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there's one aspect that I from this framework, like especially number 4, that maybe talks about the ethical use, maybe the risk, well-being, and ethical use of generative AI. This is something connected to maybe what Kevin was mentioning before, which is the idea of critical Gen AI literacy. Like, do you think this is maybe a key aspect that should be included in, maybe pre-service teachers or even in service teachers? To that would be like maybe the next logical steps if you really want to introduce like generative AI as technology in language teaching.
I think so. I think so. I mean, I think for a long time we've been a bit too neutral in language teaching. We've always seen language as kind of this building blocks of skills and grammar, vocabulary, and the
Yeah,
four skills. And it forgets that we're working within a ideological framework and we're teaching something that is inherently kind of ideological.
yeah,
Which Englishes are we teaching, and like, why are we using these tools to help us to do this, and why are we using these kinds of sources? Why are our textbooks still published in Britain,
yeah.
even though all over the world, and things like this? Like why are we neutralizing this thing that's not neutral?
Mm.
So I think that the critical probably should have always been there in some ways. And I think it's a fairer kind of more honest education when we do that. And then of course there's the critical digital literacy just kind of adds to that, that we're working in this wider thing that, the technology becomes the mediator of everything, and therefore, we need to understand what that technology is doing when we use it, and we have to understand what the kind of hidden purposes might be behind that. So, when a company says we're doing this for social good,
Yeah.
please pay me $100 a month so I can do my good. You start to question that and say, do these align with each other? Is this
Mhm.
is this really, are the messages really what's actually happening here, or are there is there really is there something else happening here? Are we using language, and are we just using their language
Yes.
uh, to justify us using these tools? Or for sure, the work of like Ron Darwin and Christoph Hafner and other people, and Chile Wenger, they talk a lot about digital literacies and ideologies, and I think their work is, can help us to inform these kind of discussions as well. Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. I think there's a huge discussion about ethically correct use about critical literacies in general,
Mhm.
specifically when using Gen AI. But moving ahead slightly, or
Mhm.
moving on slightly, towards assessment. Assessment redesign is one of the most important issues in that discussion, or one of the most important issues in this discussion. Do you believe that timed in-class writing will make a spectacular comeback, or should we perhaps rethink assessment entirely to adopt it to the uses or the necessities that are emerging in the Gen AI times, really?
Yeah, I mean, again, it all depends on what the teacher wants to achieve. I mean, I think that if we do believe that fundamentally our students need to be able to write on their own without any technological assistance, if that's something we think is important, then of
Mhm.
course timed in-class assessment is probably the only way to do that. Proctored examination style assessment is probably the only way to kind of really assess that, if we believe that's to be still important. If we
Mhm.
think that the fundamental skill is the ability to write without any assistance, whether that's AI or even just a normal kind of computer assistance, or access to resources or whatever it might be, then yeah, of course, then that's the only way we can kind of do that. But the students also have to buy into that too in some ways. They have to think, well, actually, this is something I feel I need as well. So the teacher also has
Mhm.
to kind of, or the institution has to be able to sell that to the student too. It's like,
Yeah.
as part of becoming a competent user of language or whatever skills or knowledge we're trying to have, we believe that you need to be able to do that without assistance. Then
Mhm.
yeah, of course it comes back, right? Because then everyone's like, yeah, the students think this is important. I need to be able to demonstrate this. The university says this is important. The institution says this is important. This is something you need to be able to demonstrate, and then they kind of link. But if people think, well, actually, this is not something we need anymore, if we're always going to be mediating everything through technology, which is true of other things, right? There are skills that kind of change over time and change, and therefore we don't need those skills anymore, and they kind of fall away from the curriculum, and then new kind of skills come into the curriculum,
Mhm.
or knowledge come into the curriculum. Then maybe not, right? Then we'll have to redesign and think about like how do we assess these new skills and knowledge we think our students need. So
Mhm.
is that then working with an AI or working with other technologies to kind of work on a text? If that's what we want them to be able to do, we want them to be able to kind of kind of take the lead, but working with tools to kind of come up with something that's better than they can do, that's better than other people have done. But then we need a new assessment model. We have to understand how do we
Mhm.
assess that? How do we
Yeah.
assess those kind of interactions? How do we get that from them? So I think it depends on what we want them to be able to demonstrate, and that's the challenge I think going forward is like you know, yeah. I mean, in language learning, I think there's always going to be some space for demonstrating what I can do without assistance, because there are times when, you know,
Mhm.
that we will likely need to be, the goal will be that we can just use language, right? That we don't need to kind of like get Google Translate out, because if we do, then we're not able to demonstrate our knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we can't verify that. So if so within languages, there's a good chance we're always going to have some kind of proctored
Yeah.
No, I
environment.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, no, what you said, I think there was something really, really, really interesting in there that kind of caught my attention a little bit. The purpose of use of the assessment. I was just thinking, and I'm just talking right away, so that it's not rehearsed or anything.
No worries.
I was just thinking if we are in because you're from a world Englishes, global Englishes background, right? You said that's one of your research
Yes,
interests.
of course I teach, but it's not necessarily my background. It's just
Yeah.
that,
Okay.
you know how we are. We're assigned courses that.
Well, very true indeed. Well, but especially from that perspective, I think is really interesting because if you train a non-native, well, obviously you train a non-native speaker to learn English because a native speaker probably wouldn't anyway. Then if it's just purely transactional, let's say English for specific purposes, business English, people who need to communicate in English in their work, they probably could make bigger use of Gen AI
Yeah.
rather than someone who's interested in reading, interpreting, and somehow replicating Shakespeare.
Mhm.
So I think that's something that caught my attention very much there when you said it depends on the purpose on how we need or maybe not need to change or redesign assessment.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and I think that also goes down to the motivations to learn language in the first place too, right?
Yes.
If it's all instrumental, then I can see that there's a good chance that a lot of people will start to reject the need.
Yeah.
Because they'll say, well, I don't need this skill anymore. I can mediate most of the environments I have. The time investment is great. I can invest that time in other things. And whether this is true or not, when they say invest in other things, maybe it's not so true. But this is definitely one of the discourses that they will experience, or one of the arguments they will experience, right? And they were like, well, I could invest this time in other things. I'm happy with technology mediating this part of my life, right? If I go to Japan for business, I'm happy for, to turn on a tool and interact with a tool, and the tool interacts with my speaker,
Yeah.
with my interlocutor, and it just becomes that thing in between us. But maybe over time, it almost becomes less and less obvious that it's there, right? Just like, Zoom's become less and less awkward. But when
Yeah.
we first started with it, it was actually quite an
Yes.
awkward technology for us to kind of get used to, right?
Very much so. That's a
Yes.
good
Yeah.
comparison.
Yeah, so I think eventually that could happen. So if that instrumental purpose is the kind of key thing, and that's something I tell my teachers in Hong Kong when I'm working with them primary and secondary, is like, we have to kind of come with a kind of another reason for them to learn, because they're getting these things like you won't need English in the future, da 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 da, and it's very attractive kind of argument, right? Because it's hard. So if something's hard, and someone says you don't need it, why am I going to spend time on something that's hard? I don't need.
Yes.
So then we have to kind of like say, well, if that's true, then what do we do? And or we have to think, okay, like what are the other benefits of learning language that can help us to kind of that we can help our learners to kind of go beyond just instrumental, but other reasons as well. And then when we're assessing those, it becomes perhaps different, right? So I always say to my teachers, you can't just say, the favorite thing to say here is, you need English to get into a good secondary school, you need English to get into a good university. It's always instrumental. It's kind of like this part of the process. So I say to them, use the arguments around, bilinguals actually being more intelligent.
Yeah.
That skill and providing access to different cultures and understandings of the world and these kinds of like reasons for learning language. So it becomes beyond just this kind of like next level of education, or it becomes about becoming an enriched whole person by being a multilingual or bilingual person. So this and then hopefully that changes their thinking a little bit in that kind of mandatory language context, language learning context. Yeah. But yeah, and then the assessments have to follow that, right? We have to kind of make them less painful, more developmental in those contexts where the teachers have a bit more, a lot of them are kind of developed by teachers. The kind of grades are kind of superficial. It's just kind of like a marker of performance, but doesn't really tell anything to anybody. That can be changed in that sector. So it becomes like, I just want to see what you can do, rather than I want you to give perfect work. I want you to get an
A. And actually, absolutely. And maybe that helps us move on to the next part, which is something maybe that we've been discussing. Is like the idea now that maybe many teachers are basically receiving perfect essays or perfect, writing tasks. So how can we maybe replace this current emphasis on detection and hiding? And maybe do you think that transparency, maybe or being transparent about the use of maybe generative AI, or maybe connected to the idea of maybe AI, ethical use, or maybe critical digital generative AI use as well? Do you think that maybe going from detection to hiding, maybe to being transparent, would that be like maybe the next logical step?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things. Like, I think, of course, we want transparency, but transparency has to come with like them feeling there's no risk to be transparent.
Yeah.
So this is our hardest thing to overcome. And because these tools, for us, we can kind of see the flaws in what they produce. We see the issues in what they produce. But for students, sometimes they look way better than anything they can produce themselves. And they can. So for them, it can be really difficult to say, I just gave a simple prompt, or I even put the task rubric and said, can you create an essay based on this rubric? And they say transparent declaration. It did everything for me. All I did was press submit.
I just typed.
Then that transparency becomes a little bit difficult to have, right? So we have to kind of like be conscious of the kind of extremeness of it, of the full use of AI kind of option with transparency. But what we probably need to do is, like I said, is like, look at the tasks, say these are the things you could use AI for, because these don't override those things. Of course, it might be very hard for me to know that you use AI in other ways, but conscious of what you gain and lose by using AI in these ways. And what kind of person do you want to be? As a person, so the kind of the individual traits of the individual as well. Are you the kind of person that will give people, will other people's work as your own? Is that who you are? And I think deep down, people then over time, hopefully they question themselves, or at least they feel kind of like some moral. For most people, they do see some kind of there'll be some guilt or some concern about using AI in ways that give work that isn't.
It's not mine,
not mine, at the same time as we have to diversify assessments. We use a bit of process in our courses, so I coordinate some of our language center courses. So what we do is actually because there's a large courses with multiple instructors teaching students across the university. What we do is they have individual consultations on their final assignment. They do like a scientific report. They're science majors. And then the teacher, during that consultation, the students have to submit their draft. During that consultation, the teacher will sit with them and show them the AI report, not as a threat, but as in like, this is what the report says. Why do you think that might be? And what are the markers of your work that might be picked up in that way? And even if you did it yourself, that's fine, blah, blah, blah. This is like what it picks up. And then they're given kind of a week to then kind of submit the final one. So they have this kind of draft they've submitted that the teacher has. They have this AI report to kind of help them to understand how they might change it, plus teacher feedback as well.
Yeah.
And then finally, like a week later, they submit their final one. And I think having those kind of like spaces in the where the students are kind of made aware, but also like they're not seeing this as a deadline that they have to fight.
Yeah.
There's more than one deadline.
Absolutely.
Kind of helps as well. So I think it's all kind of like, yeah, finding those kind of ways to work around it. As best as possible. I mean, we did have some cases last semester of which was like discipline cases, which was substantiated because the assignments used fake data, and they couldn't prove where the data came from. So those are kind of cases that and I think raising awareness of those kinds of cases can also be good, because these are kind of like real ethical issues of using AI, right?
Yeah.
That they can create fake data sets. Things like this, and this is really problematic for human knowledge. So you can kind of widen that up to say, okay, yeah, you might be an undergraduate in your first year of study and you've created fake data, but if you're
Last
in a
year.
PhD
Yeah.
or last year or even an academic and you do the same thing, then you could actually damage society, because
Yes,
you could say
absolutely.
something true that isn't true, and
Yeah.
these kind of things. So, yeah.
You're almost answering the last question I've got for you, but I've got another question that I kind of wanted to wedge in between. But let's come back to this in a second.
Yeah.
What I was going to follow up before, and we've talked about this, I think it's been shining through throughout this episode already, is there's so many different ways of approaching the use of generative AI in language teaching, right? Like, for example, Jose and I, when we back in the day when we used to teach together, I think we were relatively accepting as long as they were honest and didn't use it to actually produce the writing itself. Now, then I've seen it institutions which completely ban the use of generative AI and punish very, very fiercely. I try to, because, well, whether I use it or not, I know my students will. My students are actually using it as more part of their reality. Well, it is their reality. It certainly is a tool that is there for them or with them. They're grown up with it, basically. So I try to be a little bit more like, this is what would be acceptable. This use is not acceptable. But please do produce an AI statement and add this to your work so I can actually understand what you did, how you use the AI. But this ranges from, I think, teachers saying, oh, look, you can use it as long as it's good and you know what you're using it for, to don't ever even think about using it. So I think there's a huge range, which also makes it difficult for people working in teacher education, obviously, because what do you teach your teachers or your future teachers? To cut a very long question, hopefully a bit shorter. That's actually a very brief question. If you could give one piece of advice to early career language teachers, be that pre-service or just in like newly qualified teachers entering the profession in the age of AI, what would you suggest? What piece of advice would that be?
There's no rush. There's no rush to use AI. Yeah, there's no rush. Like, give yourself some time. Like, we're like, I think it was mentioned at the beginning. Sometimes there's a bit of a jumping on the bandwagon, right? Like having to try the new. I think like using whiteboards, electronic whiteboards. And everyone had to learn how to use them, and everyone had to use them. And I remember when I was doing more like pre-service teacher education and going up to observe students in the classroom, they all wanted to use whiteboards at that time, interactive whiteboards at the time, demonstrate they could do that. And then I remember like when we started to get like interactive like response systems like Kahoot and like Mentimeter, they all wanted to demonstrate they could use those. So you end up going to almost like kind of cookie cutter lessons where everybody's doing kind of like a Kahoot quiz, because it's a new thing. It's fun and it's engaging and all kind of, and that's how it's sold to the students. Of course, it has a lot of limitations, the kind of questions that can be asked, the amount of class time it took, classroom management issues around device use and things like this, and ranking of students based on performance, lots of issues, right? But they weren't thinking about those. They're thinking, this is engaging, this is interesting, my students like it, they're on task, da 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 da. So I think it's so there's always this kind of rush to integrate technologies into teaching. So I think my first advice would be like, hold your horses,
Yeah.
slow down. Like if you don't feel ready to use these tools, or you think you might use them, but then maybe you haven't thought through everything that could happen, then don't. Just spend some time understanding how they work, how you might use them, read more about how they might work, talk to teachers about how they're using them, and then feel comfortable to use them when you do them. And then know things may not go right, and
Yeah.
that's okay too. And like kind of do that with them to make them feel more comfortable. I mean, I went to a school that was really paranoid about integrating AI because they didn't want to get left behind. And I said, there's no rush. What you were doing 4 years ago was fine.
You don't have to integrate it.
It's a primary school. There's no rush. There's no rush to suddenly have AI grading. There's no rush. You've been grading your students' work since the school began. Like there's no sudden need. It's not going to materially make your students' lives better
Yeah.
because you're using it. But they thought it was because everyone's talking about it in such a hyperbolic way.
Yeah.
Also a selling point, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And they're
When
being
you think about stakeholders.
Yeah. So I think for pre-service teachers, there's no rush. Take your time. Be ready when you're ready. And I think that made them feel more comfortable. I mean, I do know from my own research that pre-service new teachers do like AI because it does they find it as like a way to kind of reduce some of the demands of their job, which can actually be quite good for their kind of when they're kind of feeling overwhelmed when they begin. For example, they do find a text and they think it's too difficult. They can ask AI to make it easier. Those things that they would have really struggled with before, taking a lot of time to do, they kind of use AI, but they're not necessarily thinking about loss of authenticity, things like that when they're doing that. But it is making their life easier. So I think giving them tools to use AI, giving them suggestions to use AI that might help them, but then making them conscious that what do you lose? And then giving them a choice and saying you don't need to use AI. That's also okay. Then I think that's probably the best advice.
There's no rush.
There's no rush.
That's a really nice, relaxed way of seeing it. I do really appreciate that. I'm almost afraid of asking the next question because I feel there's no rush, Kevin. There's no rush. This could be a huge question, and I usually try to finish on something
lighter,
pleasant and lighter. Yes, but let's allow me to ask this question, please. When we think about hallucinated citations, fabricated references, when we think about I would almost say, loss of academic integrity, which thankfully, at least to my knowledge, is not part of day-to-day editors' experiences, is not a huge part of published work, yet hopefully won't be in the future. But AI has crept into published work, and that people have been found out, and correspondingly, their reputation has taken a hit. Now, whether that was on purpose or not is a question we can't answer from this conversation, obviously. But going back to AI literacy and moving this conversation a little bit into the area of academic vigor, of research methods, what do you think is the influence of generative AI on research methods courses, on modules on research methods, how we teach research as a concept in this sense?
Yeah, fantastic. It's a heavy question, and I could do another podcast.
I'm really sorry.
I've written about this as well. So I think AI has come at the kind of like the perfect time for itself in terms of where we are in kind of the academic and publishing community. Like we're already kind of in this kind of idea of efficiency times, right? Where it's all about doing more with less time.
Perish or
within
publish or perish.
exactly. Like, and in Hong Kong, we're like the kind of leaders of that, right? We're like the kind of insane publishing people, like constantly having, because we've got resources, we've got access, we've got, so we can kind of lead those, kind of set the benchmark of how much can you do per year almost in our fields. And it's really problematic because it creates this idea that we can create knowledge faster and easier. And then it kind of dilutes the whole knowledge base, right? Because the more that's out there, the less people can find anything that's actually tangibly valuable, right? If you've got 50 papers about using AI for writing, which one is the one that I should read, which actually adds value to my knowledge, which I can implement in my teaching? Probably very hard to find, because instead of reading one or two influential or groundbreaking papers, you're reading 50, which is not going to happen, right? So you probably end up reading none.
Very true.
Yeah, rather than so it's kind of fitting really well into that paradigm, that kind of like efficiency paradigm. So I think one thing is to kind of which is really hard, but is to kind of spend some time trying to challenge that a little bit, trying to get students to kind of remember that the goal is they're contributing to knowledge. So the goal is not the publication. The goal is the kind of enhancing our understanding of the world, improving the lived experiences of teachers, students, or whoever may be your kind of demographic that you're writing for. So trying to go back to that as the goal, and then the publication is the medium of doing that. So kind of go back to that kind of original thought, original idea, really trying to make emphasis on that. Because most of our courses, they don't really focus on that. They teach about methodology, how to do the study. They don't really talk about why we're doing the study. And it's almost like implicit that we all know that, but we don't state it in our courses. So I think going back to that, right, and spending effort kind of going with original thought, original idea, original contribution, because I think that's where, I've just started as a journal editor. And then now I'm really, really focusing on that. Interestingly, the first two rejections I had to do from peer reviewer comments were both about originality. They're saying this paper's fine. It's methodologically fine, but it adds nothing to our understanding. And I had to go back to the authors and say, your study's fine, but you're adding nothing to your understanding, and give that reason for rejection, because we got this too much, right? So I think going back to that is really fundamental. And then if tools help you to do that, if they help you to kind of come up with that contribution that benefits society in some way, whether that's through a better understanding, then fine. So that's one thing. The other one would be then teaching the difference between the tools, because large language models were never designed to be research tools. They're general purpose tools that's supposed to do everything. They're kind of like, I don't know who they are, like the graduate who never graduated a discipline but graduated with all disciplines. They're not specialists in anything, right? So they're specialists in everything. So then you kind of go to kind of like, okay, how do we find literature traditionally? How do AI find literature? What's their process of doing this? Talk about the kind of research tools that exist, like Elicit, Consensus, Research Rabbit. How do they work? If we use them in certain ways, what happens? Yes, they don't hallucinate, but they're also not looking at text the way we do. So that's fine. You won't get hallucinations, but will you get understandings that move the field forward? Those kinds of things. And kind of keep going back to that. And we should probably spending more time, rather than training really, really strong people with really strong methodology, people with really strong ability to kind of originate. I think that's what I'd like to see in research methods courses.
That's a good answer. I think
absolutely
that would add a lot of value
to
those courses.
I think.
Thank you very much, Benjamin.
No worries. You can ask a light question as well.
I'll think about a few more next time. I'm going to bring out the proper difficult ones.
Okay, sure.
So Benjamin, thank you very much. For accepting our invitation, and probably I think also something that we have discussed with Kevin is maybe in a year's time, or maybe in 2 years, we'll see where we are, where we're going to be at in terms of, tools, or how fast, because if we go back to the launch of ChatGPT, I think in 2022, we've come, a long way to, I think it's model.
Only about 3.5, 4 years. Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, the field has grown exponentially. And I think in this area also is permeating, let's say, all different areas of our lives. Absolutely. So thank you very much again, Benjamin. And with this, we conclude today's episode with Dr. Benjamin Luke Moorhouse. So thank you very much for helping us navigate, and also with Kevin's really difficult questions and long questions. But I think the idea was, try to understand this technological shift, and, but not only that, but also as a pedagogical and also an ethical one. And I think I would really like to recommend Benjamin's book, Generative Artificial Intelligence and Language Teaching. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, you can reach us at podcast@elteenchile.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can visit our website, www.elteenchile.com. So, Benjamin, thank you very much again for your time.
Thank you very much, Benjamin.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.